Hey, so one thing I did say I wanted to talk about that I found super interesting was the story of Parley P. Pratt. And so he was one situation that was told to me online, like probably in a chat room on YouTube, where someone was just arguing that, our leaders of the Church of Christ Latter-day Saints, they were living spiritual wifery and they were sharing wives or stealing wives. And he's like, you need to look at Parley B. Pratt. And the spirit was like, do it, Debbie. Okay. And I did. And the story I found was just, what? And then I related back to that person that couldn't say anything. So I was just like, yeah, I don't regret looking that up. I'll just say I am an active member of the Church of Christ Latter-day Saints. We just stumbled upon this. I don't believe that Parley P. Pratt lived spiritual life-free. Now, Eleanor Jane McComb, she was unable to get, I think, an official divorce, but there's a whole long story about this and understanding the laws, understanding that, she thought she was leaving the United States. Crazy story of abuse of this insane husband. I just think it needs to be told. But I don't believe that Parley believed that women should be passed around like they were in spiritual life, or that they should live, because he definitely spoke against that. I'm going to just show you a quote of his where he actually accuses Sidney Rigdon, and other people who were excommunicated. If you live spiritual life, you're excommunicated. If you were called and lived plural marriage, it wasn't adultery, it wasn't spiritual life, because the wife was just yours. So if a woman divorces a guy, or in her mind does, that's sort of the case here. But basically he's going off. And this is before they went to Salt Lake, but he's already living plural marriage, and he's saying it's different because we're committed to these women. We're taking care of them. They're our wife, we're committed.
Okay, so just super quick, this is actually footnote 15 that I'm just going to read really quickly about Sidney Rigdon. And so this was after Joseph Smith's death in February 1845. And it's the minutes. This wasn't going to end up like in the Not Your Neighbor. This is not some public thing. They're just discussing, like some people were excommunicated, and Parley P. Pratt was convinced, I'll just say that Sidney Rigdon and Lyman White, that they were just selling women to one another, committing adultery. So that means a woman is with more than one guy, right? Or she's married, she's with another one. So here is, I'm not going to read all of that. They do say, like I've said, you will hear some church historians think that spiritual wifery was just unauthorized plural marriage. It was nothing like plural marriage at all. It was more like spiritual wifery. Free love. It was spiritual wifery. To me, it's just a word. It meant what it meant. To them, that was how it was. Like we say free love. To them, they said spiritual wifery. They knew what they meant. Okay, and so he was saying that there was a distinct difference according to Parley P. Pratt right here. Okay, you can see a distinction between plural marriages and the unauthorized by proper priesthood and spiritual life doctrines, such as Bennett and others practice, which allowed for, sexual relations between men and spiritual wives. They're temporary. Spiritual wife is more akin to like the Handmaid's Tale, right? They aren't married. They don't matter. They're nothing, right? Spiritual wifery is, and that is more similar to like the Middle East, where women are just temporary commitment. They sign a piece of paper. There's some sort of like commitment there, but it's temporary until they move on to someone else. They're treated like trash. That's why it's bad. So they're saying it's awful. And he wrote that on spiritual wives, Pratt said, any such doctrine known, held, or practiced as a principle of the Latter-day Saints, if a man has a wife according to the law of God and regulations of the church, she's a real wife, body, soul, and spirit, and not his spiritual wife. Similarly, a husband is her real husband, to provide for his wife and children, to be their real head and father. Like, the point is to have children, take care of them. You are the father, she is the mother, they're always her children. Okay, that this woman has value. And then they go into allegations about Cindy Rigdon, which I'm not going to read a whole lot more because this is just, you can read that yourself, but this is him. They did talk about it. Okay, this is one example.
So clearly, spiritual wifery, no commitment. You're not taking care of her. She's not yours. You're not being a good husband. And I'm going to just throw in another quote, just especially when it comes to abuse. I think it would be good for women in abusive marriages to hear this. I mean, again, it's not official doctrine. It just comes from Lucy Walker, who was a plural wife of Joseph Smith, but he was explaining to her, these, in the order of plural marriage, you have to treat your wife. So all these women, time and eternity, feeling you're a wife, you're moving in, you're everything married, right? You're doing all the things married people do. And Lucy said that she did. So that she had a lot of personal talks with him, and he said, there'll be a lot of men on the morning of the resurrection shocked that their wife is not there. And he's talking about members of the church, people who think that they have had time and eternity ceiling and it's just binding and I can just treat my wife however I want, is basically what he's talking about. Guys, he knows guys like that. But it was, if you don't treat your wife right, she will not be yours. In the next life, she'll just be someone else's. She just isn't yours. So it's just unfortunate. I do know members of the church are not perfect people. You will find people who end up being murderers, like Chad and Lori Daybell, even though he wanted a mission. It's not a guarantee. You start following something that's like a Ouija board. I definitely believe Satan will lead you to murder and just horrible, horrible acts. Killing children is just the most disgusting, horrible thing. There's too much evidence that I just fully think it would. I have very little doubt in my mind that they'll find Lori and Chad Daybell were not guilty. But anyway, they committed adultery. They were not brave enough to leave or divorce. They wanted the life insurance, Anyway, enough with them. Let's jump into the case of Parley P. Pratt and Eleanor Jane McComb. And so it's going to be sort of a long story, but I'll try to make it interesting. So in 1841, Eleanor Jane McLean, so she lived from 1817 to 1854, and she married Hector McLean 3 years, and then, after 3 years of marrying him in 1841. Sorry, I took some notes here and I'm getting confused already. 3 years after that, so it was like 1844, she almost divorced him because he's an alcoholic. And she only leaves for a short time around 1844. She's not Nauvoo. She's not a member of the church, just prefacing that. She's in Louisiana. I should have thrown that in here. But yeah, she's in the South, Louisiana. Meets Hector. And there was a whole bio. I'm going to give you a link to a website that has a longer bio about her family living here, moving there. So many sources. It's really well done. So that's where I'm drawing it from. But Hector, so she left him for a short time, went back to her family. But Hector just writes her this letter, and he just promises he's going to change. How often do many of us that have known abusers hear and see that? And yeah, she goes back. They have 3 children. Fitzroy, Albert, and Annie. And with one of her brothers with her as like her protector, he's like not gonna let his sister be alone. It's interesting. They all moved to San Francisco. So they go from Louisiana to San Francisco, California, United States. So the website I was using, it's jaredprattfamily.org. But from the website it says, it was in San Francisco that they came in contact with the Mormon church. After attending a Mormon meeting with Hector and her brother, J.J. McComb, Eleanor wanted to join the church, but was forbidden to do so by her husband, who purchased a sword, cane, and threatened to kill her and the minister who baptized her if she became a Mormon. Okay. In spite of this threat, Eleanor attended church meetings as often as she could, so she joined anyway. And one Sunday night, while Eleanor was singing from a Mormon hymn book she had purchased, Hector tore the book from her hands, threw it into the fire, beat her, cast her out into the street, and locked the door. She sought the help of a Dr. Bush, the family doctor, who took her to a hotel, boarded her there for 3 days, 3 nights, and charged the bill to Hector. The next day, she filed a charge of assault and battery against Hector, planning to go to San Bernardino to live with the saints and never return. She dropped the charges and she returned to Hector. Following the advice of Dr. Bush and the members of the San Francisco branch, she describes the incidents as follows: that Mr. McLean put me by violence into the street at night and locked the door against me. Captain Gray and Dr. Bush were our witnesses, and I presume McLean himself would not deny that I then declared that I would no more be his wife. However, many years I might be compelled to appear as such for the sake of my children. So the moment he throws her in the street, she's like declared, I am not your wife. So I guess that was the advice of all these other people, like, we'll divorce him. I don't know. There's details missing there. But Parley P. Pratt, he served in the Pacific Mission in San Francisco in 1854 with his wife, Elizabeth. Eleanor McLean brought them essentials, food, bedding, clothing. So she's just doing a service as a member of the church. And she informed them of her abusive husband and asked for help. So Parley tried to talk to the husband, Hector, and it didn't help. It did no good. Her two oldest were baptized, and Hector was so mad that he decided to have Eleanor committed. So Parley decides that he's going to assign this young missionary, John R. Young, to watch out for Eleanor and help her. He was instructed to, quote, listen to the whisperings of the Spirit and do as it directs, and you shall be successful. So John sings, Oh, my Father, and walking past the McLean house, nothing happens. He reads his scriptures and prays, and he goes back the next day and finds they are advertising for a cook, and he takes them up on the offer. In John's journal, now quoting, he says, a week later, the directors of the insane asylum, a physician and Mrs. McLean's brother, who was a banker, called as an examining committee. They had a long talk with Mr. and Mrs. McLean, then called in the children, who had been kept in the home for that purpose. After a long talk with them, Mrs. McLean suggested that the cook be called. Oh, how I prayed that I might be directed to say the right thing and not say too much. In answer to the question, I said, Mrs. McLean comes in every day to the kitchen, tells me what she wants, and instructs me how to do it. She's always calm and sensible in her talk. I see no evidence of insanity in her conduct. As to Mr. McLean, I can say but little. He stays in his room until breakfast is ready and immediately afterwards goes to his office. When he returns at night, his step does not seem as firm and steady as it does in the morning. He appears nervous and walks about and talks a good deal to himself. Mrs. McLean's brother seemed pleased with my statement. The committee decided that Mr. McLean had no grounds for his complaint, and the shadow of the insane asylum was dispelled. So she's not committed. I felt very happy about this, but a few days later, something else happened. A man called at the bank where Mr. McLean was a cashier, and after a few minutes of business conversation, he said, I want to ask you a question. You seem so pronounced against the Mormons. Why do you employ missionaries, a cook in your home? McLean seemed surprised, and the man continued, do you not know that he is the same young man who was tracting the city and selling Mormon literature? McLean hurried home and, coming to me, demanded, are you a Mormon? Yes, sir, I answered. Shaking his fist in my face, he exclaimed, if you were not a child, I would kill you. Great guy. What have I done that you should want to kill me? You're teaching the false doctrines of Joseph Smith. And says a whole lot more, but Hector gives him John $40, and he uses it to continue to Hawaii. And he goes on a mission there. And Hector then sends the children back to Louisiana via ship Sierra Nevada. Eleanor then tries to obtain money to take the next steamer to Louisiana. And Parley is one who is helping her to afford this. And then after she cries all night, Hector decides he's going to help her pay for this too. And here's a letter from the website that they found. Parley wrote to Amasa Lyman on 2nd of March, 1855, saying he was planning to get her kids and take them to Zion. How she was planning to get her kids and take them to Zion. So she's planning to go to Utah. She's just going to leave Hector, obviously. She's already announced she's not his wife. Note, since her beating, she declared herself not his wife, saying she would physically live with him, but did not consider herself. Anyway, he had threatened again to have her committed. But quoting from the JaredPrattFamily.org website, the children had been sent to New Orleans, accompanied by neither friend or relative, just alone, little kids. They traveled by ship to San Juan, Nicaragua, and then by steamer to New Orleans. Sent them all the way to like South America and back all alone, arriving the 13th of February. They were taken to their maternal grandparents. And so Eleanor's own father had a close watch on her when she got there. So she gets there. Her own father is just like convinced by Hector that she's a bad mother. And Eleanor left for 4 days with the children from her father because it was awful. And reading from the website, I guess her father then pleaded to change his treatment of her and let her have a room and free access to the children if she pledged she would not take them out of the city. So somehow her father has control over her. She can't take the kids out of the city. And now we can see her own father is controlling and abusive. She agreed and returned to her father's house. Under these circumstances, her health declined. Obviously, what mothers wouldn't. And finally, she asked her father to help her arrange passage to Salt Lake, which sounds a little bit weird, like she's leaving her children, but she sort of has a plan. She's planning on trying to figure out a way to get her kids there and just to what she considered safety. She loved the Saints. And nothing's going on between her and Parley. They couldn't find any evidence of this at this point. She was given the means to take the Mayflower to St. Louis and then to the Alma to Atkinson's, Kansas, where she found a Mormon immigration party that hired her as a cook to pay her way to Salt Lake. Anyway, she arrived on the 11th of September, 1855. And when she left San Francisco and Hector, she would later state in court that, again, she had left him as a wife the night he drove her from the home. Whatever legal situation, she thought of herself as an unmarried woman. And so, I mean, because women had like no rights even. Side note, Emma, she married this guy Bideman after Joseph Smith died, and her own sons are explaining, like I think it was the 1870s when all this horrible stuff started being found out about Bideman. He cheated on her, had a child with another woman. Interestingly enough, Joseph Smith, that has never been proven to have happened. I mean, he did have other wives, but he didn't have any kids. He wasn't, it didn't happen. So he clearly wasn't doing much to have that happen. But Bideman did. And she and her son was saying how like it was Joseph Smith III in his memoirs. It's just like it was back then, 1870. So this is 20 years earlier. How it was almost impossible for a woman to get a divorce or have or own anything if she did. Women just had no rights. It wasn't favorable to women. Like today they say it's sort of the opposite. It's women can easily, most states easily leave, but it depends on the state. So anyway, her father's keeping her from taking her children, and so she moves alone to Salt Lake City, and there she applied for a job as a school teacher, and then she married Parley after a month in Utah. That's at the point when something happens. She's been away from her husband. She's declared herself not his wife. It's almost impossible for her to get a divorce back then, let alone Emma herself, 20 years later, can't divorce Bideman. It's very hard for women to do. Anyway, Parley's journal states, ministered in the endowments and has sister Eleanor Jane McCone sealed to me at the altar by President Brigham Young. And then the documents show that it was time and eternity. She was his wife. So she did marry Parley P. Pratt. Story continues. The 24th of August, 1856. Parley is called to the Eastern States Mission. So Louisiana, I guess, was included in that, and Eleanor asked to join him, of course, hoping to get her kids back. And so she goes back to Louisiana, and she tells her father that she's not Mormon and wants her kids. As she leaves with her 2 children, so unless she says, I'm not Mormon, her father will not let her have her kids back. And as she leaves with her 2 children, she writes her dad saying that she's married to Parley P. Pratt and she's taking them into Utah. And we take honesty really seriously in our faith, so it seems like a really stupid move that she did. But at the same time, she probably wanted her temple recommend active, like where you need to be honest in your dealings with fellow men. Like you have to renew that every 2 years. I'm not sure how often they had to renew it, but I think it's always been a part of. And people, of course, think we're deluded and liars, but honesty is very, very important. Lying is, legally is bad, but in the church, it's really, really bad. You're supposed to be honest. And I think maybe that's why she felt bad for lying, because that was a blatant lie to her dad. But it was the only way she could get her kids back. So she makes it to Texas with her kids. And she worked as a seamstress for a bit. And so I think that's what it was in Salt Lake City. She's like, okay, I'm going to go there, just kind of settle. You're on these people, feel safe again, make some money, and then got a new husband that could take care of her. So who knows? Like there might have been, we just couldn't find any evidence of anything physically happened because, you don't do anything physically until you have a time attorney sealing. So I don't believe Parley did anything with her when they were in California, and she was still considered herself the wife of Hector McLean. Anyway, Hector, she finds out Hector's coming after her, because her father contacts Hector, even knowing he's abusive. So clearly her dad was also abusive, in my opinion. And then somehow apostates find out and inform, because they're stalking, Parley, because why not? And they inform Hector of his travel plans. And Parley gets word of this. And so by this point, defectors have physically joined forces with Hector, who is like there in the East. To like in Texas or whatever. He's planning to kill Parley P. Pratt. Parley is disguised and leaves town, and Hector is joining forces with the police because he's lying and finding reasons to get the police to go get Parley. And apostates search every Latter-day Saint home, and they don't find Parley. And again, we know he knew Parley, sorry is what I'm saying, in San Francisco, had conversed with him, and he blamed him for his wife joining, and now he hears that he's married his wife and is with anti-Mormons planning to kill Parley. Parley begins looking for Eleanor, thinking that she is with the Mormon train, but she went with a different group when she finds out that Hector is coming. Maybe a smart move, I don't know. Parley tries to send her word where she is. Staying in the Indian nations is where Parley is, and he felt safe. And then he started on a main road after he felt like he was okay. After taking side roads, and then on the main road, he sees militia coming after him. And Parley says that it's all over. And Parley's taken into custody. Then Hector, it's unreal what he does. Somehow he found letters of Parley's to Utah. So anti-Mormons, so you just couldn't trust the mail back then. I guess you can't today either, can you? But they found and read his letters to one of his wives in Utah and found where he was going to go and what was going on. And so Hector had failed to capture Parley in St. Louis, and Hector goes to Louisiana, finds Parley's mail, and knows that his wagon train his wife is on, because of the letters. And the letter says what Parley's travel plans are, and he meets up with Eleanor, finds her, steals the kids from her. On horseback, just grabs them and goes. And then she's arrested for larceny of clothing belonging to Albert and Annie McLean, the clothes on her kids. She's arrested for stealing the clothes that were on her kids. She was charged with stealing the clothes she already owned. The officer allows her to see Parley, who had been captured, and this conversation ensues. Eleanor says, "How do you do, Brother Pratt?" "Very well, madam. How is your health?" Parley replies. I am in health, but that demon who has been in my pathway these 13 years has again crossed my way. He's torn my children again from me, and he says I shall never see them again. Parley then says, well, my sister, never mind. These things are all in short lifetime, and life is but a speck of eternity, and soon will be over. Eleanor turned to him and said, Brother Parley, I rejoice in one thing. Mormonism has taught me to live and taken from me all fear of death in the grave. And then she raised her hand and voice and turned to the crowd and said, now you, civil and military officers, soldiers, you can kill the body. And after that, you have no power over the soul. Do what you please. I am ready and willing to die as to live, but that is my Father's business. And so Parley's put in jail. Eleanor is brought to a boarding house, and she's totally beat up and bruised. So we're missing some details, but clearly she wasn't going to let her kids be taken away without a fight. So we're missing some details, but Hector is like planning to come up with harsher charges because he knows those charges will be dropped because there's no evidence, right? And Parley and Eleanor were then taken to Van Buren, Arkansas. That's how they end up in Arkansas. So in court, this conversation ensues. I suppose, madam, that you've been arrested upon a charge of larceny? Eleanor, yes, sir, I know the charge, but it is false. Well, madam, I suppose that you will not deny that you were happy with Mr. McLean until this man, Pratt, Mormonism, crossed your pathways. Eleanor, yes, sir, I must declare that for many years I heard Mormonism. Before I heard Mormonism, McLean drove happiness from our home by embidding that spirit that comes from bottles. And because I was a mother, I would fain have escaped impending a fate foreshadowed in the breath of a man who had learned to love wine more than he loves the happiness of the wife of his bosom. And down through 13 long years I suffered this blight, and at length he put me by violence in the street in a dark winter's night in a wicked city, and I was compelled to seek shelter, protection in a public house. So again, this is written down in court. So this is her testimony. And do you suppose, sir, a woman conscious of having done her duty as a virtuous wife and faithful mother, could be induced to come again to the arms of that man? No, sir, it was not Mormonism that desolated McLean's home, but that spirit that comes in bottles, deeds of desperation, and at last he found a pretext in my religion that was unpopular. And upon this ground, he might treat his family with personal violence, thrust his wife into the street, lock the doors, sent his children while infants upon the high seas to go many thousands of miles without one friend they had ever seen. And now it is no marvel that he is prepared to tell a lie and swear it, imprison innocent persons, and drag them before an excited populace in a land where mob law defiance to the constitutional government and the civil courts. I have no hope of justice in this land, sir. Yet who but a wife could know of this state of things? If he could not eat dinner, he was sick. If he vomited, it is because he was sick, and the children pitied Pa because he was sick. And if a neighbor called, he was excused on the same ground. The wife might shed a million tears of untold bitterness between the setting and rising of the sun, and who could know it? The judge then said, I think, madam, it is the mind of district attorney to release you as prisoner and call you as a witness in this case. Well, sir, I am in your power and you can do as you please, but I hope to be protected from insult or injury, is what Eleanor said. And then here's, the judge again. Oh, yes, madam, you will be taken to the best hotel and all your wants attended to, and no one shall molest you. Thank you, sir. And then we go into Parley. They read his charges, and they're in trial, and Hector pulls up a gun and just tries to shoot him in court. There's a mob there. The mob doesn't care, but he's taken out of there because the judge still believed in law, at least. And Parley they postponed the trial, and they set it for a point where the mob wouldn't know. And in this trial, he's acquitted. He's held in jail only for his safety because the mob was really violent towards him. So Parley's still with all these anti-Mormons that hate and want to kill Parley. And he was given his horse, knife, and pistol and refused, saying he didn't need them, saying he has a gold in one pocket and a gold watch, and says to send them to his family in Salt Lake, and asks the coming train to take his dead body back to Salt Lake. He has lost all hope of surviving. He leaves his dying testimony, and I told them, he's like, I die a firm believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ as revealed through the prophet Joseph Smith. and I wish you to carry this, my dying testimony. I know that the gospel is true and that Joseph Smith was a prophet of the living God. I am dying a martyr to the faith. After Hector murdered Parley, he was found with the mob drunk, saying they wanted to lynch Eleanor. Great people. I mean, he was stabbed, and one went directly to the heart. And they found evidence that a bullet had struck his collarbone. And they asked, but when they found him, they asked if they should send for a doctor, and Parley had said, "I want no doctors, for I will be dead in a few minutes." The judge had collected some money from various people in Van Buren for Eleanor, and he told her that he sympathized with Parley and had never seen a man quite like him, so uncomplaining and free from every feeling of revenge. He told Eleanor that he had instructed Hector to leave Parley alone because he had failed to prove one thing against him. And so that's basically all the story that I'm going to tell you today of that. Again, it, to me, in my mind, understanding what time and eternity sealings are, understanding the whole story. I went and told that to that person on YouTube, and they're just like, "Oh, well," they just couldn't say anything. They're just like, "Just look it up. You'll find some anti-Mormon source with a bunch of ellipses." No, I found a website that was just pages, and there's way more information. So I recommend that you go ahead and go to the, I think it was Jared Pratt family. I'll go to the top here. .org, really great story, a lot of sources. They're just, and basically, as best that she could, she did everything she could to leave Hector and basically be divorced. So that isn't spiritual wifery. Of course, most Baptists, they will spend tithing funds making movies, trying to prove that our early leaders lived spiritual wifery, and then they're just all up in arms that today, they find that sometimes we're sealed to more than one person in the temple. But that's after someone has died. It actually goes both ways. So for my ancestors, I might have an ancestor that is female. It used to not be this way, but if she was married and her husband died marrying someone else, we seal her to both, but we're assuming that she's going to choose one, right? But we don't believe in spiritual wifery, and I do not believe I found any evidence that Parley did. I found a lot of evidence that he spoke out against it, and unfortunately, there were some early members of the church that lived it, but they all were excommunicated. Adultery was always bad. There's so many stories of people committing adultery, getting excommunicated, hating Joseph Smith, and just attacking him. 1830s, 1840s, always. Even during the polygamy years, you still couldn't commit adultery. So I think if Parley, if she didn't consider herself, if she was still married and considers herself married and something happened, but it seems like nothing happened at that point, not until she declared. And she was talking to members of the church, and they were saying, declare it, do this, do everything you can to cut ties with this guy. But she physically had to go back. It's just awful. So luckily today, if you are in an abusive situation, if you're a member of the church, just know, if your husband's abusive to you, you're not bound to him. You should just leave him. You should get a divorce. Because as far as your eternity sealing, if he's never going to change, and a lot of them don't. I mean, some can. I've heard some cases of abusive fathers, husbands totally changing and just repenting, and it can happen. I do know that the atonement's real and people can change, but sometimes people have just gone past feeling, or it's just not worth it. You're not, according to Lucy Walker, you're not going to have to live with that guy in the next life. So you may as well just leave your abusive husband. So that's what I'm pleading with anyone watching today. Just get out. I've not been married before, but I've been in abusive living situations before. And it's definitely terrifying, and just how it's just unreal how manipulative and dishonest these people can be. And you can try to leave them, but they never forget about you. They can't just let you go, and it's sad and it's awful. It's scary. So I feel that. I know how that is, but this life is short, just like Eleanor says, and she sort of knew she wasn't getting a happy ending, and she didn't. And it's a very, very sad story. But Go ahead and check out that website and have a good day.